Bobby Fischer, the greatest chess player of all time.
And very humble too, I see.
The game I'm going to show you is from the 1959 Candidates Tournament in Bled, Slovenia.
Nice town.
I was 16 years old, and have already won the U.S. Chess Championship 2 times.
That is nothing.
And to make more time for chess, I had just dropped out of high school.
What?
You don't learn anything in school anyways.
That's a real quote. He actually said that.
Yes, and in fact, only a stooge would not understand what is to be my destiny as the world chess champion.
Exactly, and I'll prove it.
I am playing Svetozar Gligoric,
Not a stooge.
the Yugoslav Grandmaster.
Yes, I won the Yugoslavian Chess Championship a record 12 times. And did you know that I, as a chess player, was declared the best athlete of Yugoslavia in 1958?
Who cares? This is of no importance to me.
I object, Your Honor. It is merely an attempt to influence this intelligent, broad-minded, and most intellectual jury.
Or maybe not. Time to start this game.
Great, some curious fans.
My favorite first move. Pawn to e4.
Pawn to c5. The Sicilian. We're going to fight today.
Yes, I will punch, and you will fall.
Yeah, we will see. Nice suit.
Knight to f3.
Knight to c6.
Pawn to d4.
Pawn captures pawn.
Knight captures pawn.
Knight to f6.
Knight to c3.
Pawn to d6.
Bishop to c4. My favorite diagonal for the light squared bishop, pointing at the vulnerable f7 pawn. Yeah, you, f7.
Bishop to d7.
Bishop to b3. My second favorite spot for the bishop.
Pawn to g6. Preparing to fianchetto my bishop and point it at the center of the board.
Pawn to f3. Reinforcing my e-pawn and preventing knight to g4.
Knight to a5. I have a plan.
Your plans are useless against me, and it releases too much tension in the center. This, I swear, is true.
You swear, huh? Okay then.
Take off your hat. Now raise your right hand. Now place your left hand here.
Take off your hat.
Raise your right hand. Now put your left hand here.
Please take off your hat.
These guys are confusing my friend.
Raise your right hand. Now put your left hand here.
Will you please take off your hat?
So mean.
Raise your right hand. Now put your left hand here.
Take off your hat.
Both of them. So mean.
Raise your right hand. Will you get rid of that hat?
Raise your right hand.
Ha!
Here's your truth. Bishop to g5.
Oh yeah?
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth?
Huh?
What?
He's asking you if you'll swear to tell the truth.
Certainly. What have I got to lose?
Okay, fair enough. But I still move forward with my plan. I think it's a good one. Bishop to g7, defending my knight and pointing at both of yours.
Your plan is flawed. Queen to d2.
I see what you're up to. Pawn to h6.
I believe it's time for Surefish Holmes to enter the scene.
Surefish? Sounds a lot like Stockfish. An English chess inspector? Ha!
Mr. Gligoric, I'd like to commend you on a wise move to h6. Otherwise, Bobby would likely have placed his bishop there. Then followed with pawn to h4, beginning a very powerful and mechanical attack against your king.
Thank you kindly, Surefish. It hurt me to weaken my pawn structure there, but...
I'm a victim of circumstance.
Hey!
Who are you hitting?
Hey!
Yes, a small victory there. Bishop to e3. But thanks for playing along, Svetozar.
Yeah!
Certainly.
Rook to c8. Grabbing the initiative on the open file.
No worries here. I'll castle right into it.
Okay, here I come. Knight to c4, attacking both your queen and bishop.
I could just play out the main line and take your knight, but I have a new idea for you. Queen to e2.
I believe you have just given up your advantage.
What?
I agree. Knight takes bishop.
You're both wrong. You will see.
The court understands him.
Thanks, Cordy, you're a pal.
That's one smart guy. Queen takes knight.
I'm feeling much better about kingside castling now. So here goes.
Well, start feeling worse. You just moved into my attack.
Is everybody dumb?
Pawn to g4.
You attack, I attack. Queen to a5.
Let the music begin. Pawn to h4.
Pawn to e6.
A good move, sweet as are. It was certainly a better idea than moving your pawn to h5, because Bobby would simply attack your knight with pawn to g5. Then after knight to e1, followed by pawn to f4, white has a much stronger game.
So, pawn to e6 is good, but not good enough. Knight to e2.
Bobby, that was a delightful move.
Delightful.
Pushing your pawn to g5 would still give you an advantage, but black should be able to hold after pawn captures pawn, knight to h5, pawn to f4, then queen to c5, with the threat of pawn to e5.
Of course I made a great move. Now, get ready for a great show.
Oh, I like her. Rook to c6, preparing to double up on the c file. Play on, sir. Yeah, good show.
Now, pawn to g5.
And pawn takes pawn. Back at you.
Pawn takes pawn.
Knight to h5, closing out the h file. Oh, that guy crazy.
Okay, pawn to f4. Here I come.
Oh, come to daddy. Rook to c8, with 4 pieces now pointed at your knight. Daddy means business.
I'm enjoying this dance, but before I keep pushing on, I'll concede to one quick defensive move. King to b1.
Yes, Bobby, a very important preparatory move. It could have turned out poorly if you had decided to rush in with pawn to f5.
Which I did not.
Because after pawn takes pawn and knight to d5, black's queen can take the pawn at a2, to make things very uncomfortable for you. And accepting the queen sacrifice here would certainly turn the favor towards black. Because it would follow with rook takes pawn, with check. The king is forced to b1. Rook takes pawn, with check. The king must now hide at a1. Rook takes knight, with a discovered check by the bishop. And the queen falls. White will most definitely lose from here. So, a better line, but still losing for white, would continue with knight to e7 with check. King to f8. Knight takes rook at c8. Then queen takes pawn with check. The king must move to d2, then rook takes knight. Black now has the momentum and is certainly winning.
That's a lot of words just to say, Bobby, you're one smart kid. So, back to my attack.
I'm not so sure I really like this music. How about we trade queens? Queen to b6.
No, I will not take my queen off the board.
Get out of here. Come on.
Queen to f3.
Fine, then I'll simply
Proceed.
rook to c5.
Many options for me to consider now, but I believe queen to d3. Putting pressure on your pawn at d6 works best. In fact, I think I'll give myself an exclamation point after this one.
Sorry Bobby, you are simply wrong. And deserving of a. I will now explain. Rook takes knight was the strongest move. Then after pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn. The bishop will clear out the 7th rank and add support to the f7 pawn at e8. Now it is time to push your pawn to f5. Pawn takes pawn, then knight to f4. Pawn captures pawn. Then a rather sneaky move of knight to d5, causing chaos in black's position by putting pressure on the queen, the pawn at e4, and threatening check at e7. Black is clearly losing.
Yes, queen to d3 does not bother me. I've got my eyes on a more bothersome piece. Bishop takes knight. Back to the dance. Oh, my friend.
Taking my knight was a mistake. You've lost a key defender. Knight takes bishop.
Yes, the proper move.
Of course.
Pawn takes bishop would have allowed black to gain an edge. Because it would follow with bishop to b5, pointing at the queen. Then after queen moves out of the way to d2, white's queen would shift over to a6. The knight moves to d4, then after bishop to c5, it is white that is now in an inferior position.
Maybe it was a small mistake to take your knight with my bishop, but you might have fallen into the trap that Surefish just mentioned. However, it's won me a meddling pawn at f4 and put pressure on your queen.
Another mistake. Queen to f3.
I got what I was after, so now I'll simply retreat back to h5.
Poor idea. Even if you thought...
That was sure hot, Mo.
Uh-oh. What is this?
Rook takes knight. You are about to get played.
Hey, that's not supposed... Hey, that's not supposed to be me, is it? Hey! Pawn takes rook. Maybe this will still hold. Stop laughing!
Here I come. Queen takes pawn.
Bishop to e8.
Queen to h6, cutting off your escape square of f8.
Not your best move, Bobby. Rook to h1 is a better line. Then after allowing king to f8, bishop takes pawn is a crushing move. And I would love to show the onslaught, but Mo does this in true grandmaster fashion.
He grabs Kirk by the neck like that, see? And drags him over to the letterpress, see? Then he smacks him on the head like that. Then he pokes his coconut into the letterpress, see? Like that. Then he says, I'll squeeze the cider out of your Adam's apple. Then he gives him the works like this.
Nice hair, Mo.
And he keeps turning and twisting.
Maybe rook to h1 was better, but my move of queen to h6 is strong enough. What is your response?
I'm running out of great ideas, so I'll just sack my rook too. Limit your play a bit, and steal another pawn. Rook captures knight.
If you must, but...
Please omit the rest of the entertainment and continue.
Pawn captures rook.
Rook captures pawn.
Your attack has no real bite. Mine, on the other hand, pawn to g6.
Not so nice, Bobby.
What's the matter? You want to kill me?
Pawn takes pawn.
And finally, my rook to h1 to finish you.
Oh boy.
I'm a victim of circumstance.
Hey.
Who you hitting?
Hey!
Quiet.
Queen to d4, preventing check at h8.
Which still leaves queen to h7, check.
What is wrong with you?
Cut it out. Come on.
Unfortunately, though, I must admit, the game is over. I resign.
Sorry for you, but...
Sometimes you truly are bloody insufferable.
That's right.
And as pleasant as getting pummeled by a fire hose.
What's the idea?
Uh-oh.
Give me that hose. Shut that off. Wait a minute, I'll have to tie a knot this.
But, here is how the game would have quickly ended. The king is forced to f8, then the rook slides to f1, with check. From this position, there is nothing for black to do, except to make ridiculous blocking moves, only delaying the inevitable checkmate at f7.
Which means it's now picture time for the champ.
Now, ready?
And also, comma time.